syllabi for classes, part roadmap, and part syllabus that foster an idea of utopia through workshops, self-guided exercises, readings, and other resources. Your courses draw on the lived experiences, artistic practices, organizing experiences, and training, academic and otherwise. And they offer creative approaches to tackle the wicked problems of our time and possible pathways to new worlds and alternative ways of being. These visions of thriving, potentially conflicting tomorrows are made available through a series of high-profile, accessible, and engaging open learning resources. So all the videos, syllabi, and resources are available for free and available for self-guided study, community-engaged learning, or insertion into other curriculum on the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters Mighty Network platform. So in the remainder of my time today, I'll share with you a little bit of the genesis of the project in the climate art movement and introduce you to some of our existing courses. So in 2021, I was a postdoctoral fellow in a public energy humanities at the University of Alberta, affiliated with the Transition in Energy, Culture, and Society Research Network. And at the time, I was working on a project called Sustainable Tools for Just Transition, a video archive of performance-based strategies to promote and mobilize public support for a just energy transition. To collect and document tools, I was interviewing contemporary theater makers, performance artists, social practice artists, and kind of frontline activists about the creative strategies they were deploying to imagine and inspire energy futures. While identifying and investigating these sustainable tools, I also became interested in the question of how to more effectively employ and deploy artists to mobilize public support for a just transition. So I was asking what kind of supportive structures would be necessary for bolstering this kind of cultural work. In pursuing this question, I was invited to join the mission circle of SCALE, Sectoral Climate Arts Leadership for the Emergency, which was an emerging network of artists, arts administrators, academics, and climate justice organizers working at the intersections of culture and climate in Canada. SCALE was attempting to become a national hub to develop strategy, align activities, and build the leadership capacity of Canada's arts and culture sector in the climate emergency. In roundtables and working groups, organizing efforts included developing policy briefs for a green and just recovery for the arts and culture sector, for modernizing a national cultural policy framework, infrastructure, and funding programs to meet climate and environmental goals, deliberating around an emergency mode pledge or declaration that arts organizations and institutions could sign to signify a unified commitment to climate action. So something like Music Declares Emergency, which was a kind of UK-based initiative. And also artistic experiments with climate acknowledgements, which to draw on Seth Klein's framework would make the emergency look and sound and feel like an emergency. SCALE was working with the conviction that inclusive and far-reaching collaboration within and beyond our sector would move us towards the crucial transformational tipping points needed to fundamentally shift our cultural norms throughout society from consumerism to stewardship and from extraction to regeneration in this critical decade of action. Before I joined SCALE, education had been identified as a key component of this vision, and I was invited to co-lead a working group focused on education with Ian Garrett, who works in the field of sustainability and arts and culture and is the director of the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, as well as a professor of ecological design for performance at York University. So the working group identified 3 levels of education to think through within training institutions, such as universities, within the sector, professional development, as well as through public engagement. So using artistic and research creation methods to educate publics and tell stories about what we're fighting for. And we felt that the first 2 were in process or happening through professional organizations. And so we felt our task would be to develop this creative pedagogical practice for developing the imagination necessary for the social and ecological transformations to come. One of the fundamental understandings at SCALE was that to move the needle on climate, we must look to artists not as agents of information, but agents of imagination. And this was a framework that was circulating amidst discussions of David Meggs' Metcalf Foundation report, Art and the World After This,
And it resonated with much of the literature by leading scholars and practitioners engaged in art and social change, including Steve Duncan and Steve Lambert's point in the art of activism that the dominant system doesn't dominate because most people agree with it. It dominates because we can't imagine an alternative. So we took up this task to attempt to develop a pedagogical strategy to help us cultivate the muscle of ambitious images of the future on the other side of the climate catastrophe and develop the creative curriculum, skills, and sensibilities to help us get there. One of our inspirations was the US Department of Arts and Culture, a people-powered department and a grassroots action network inciting creativity within the US. So in the absence of any official department undertaking this work, the USDAC appeared. In a similar fashion, the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters performs a department that can't otherwise exist in current structures. We borrow the organizational metaphors of a department, even as we subvert academic norms around the ways that we perform research, curriculum, rigor, ethics, and administration that tend to rely on, reify, and reproduce and legitimize racist, ableist, and colonial forms of expertise. Here, too, we were influenced by Seth Klein's research on Canada's World War II mobilization and his observation that emergencies need new institutions to get the job done. And at the same time, colleagues in local arts activist spaces were deploying similar kind of prefigurative politics, such as staging a press conference 3 years in the future from the Ministry of Just Transitions, where, again, they're playing with notions of authority and power, and echoing other kinds of speculative futures produced by collaborations of artists, organizers, politicians, and the likes. And at the same time as the department offers some kinds of gravitas through this departmental framework, it also felt equally important to embrace a spirit of playfulness and to kind of even claim that utopian language. And some of this comes from a core tenet of performance studies that, states that make believe makes belief. So the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters is also teaching me to think differently about the socially engaged functions of art in relation to social change. Sean Ginwright, a professor of education and Africana studies at SF State, was written about letting go of myths about social change. Myth number one, he says, is that we can fight our way to justice. I was taught that social change required fighting for justice, resisting oppression, and confronting power. Problem with terms like fight, resist, struggle, confront, and defend is that we become satisfied with strategies that may address problems, yet fail to create what we really want. We simply don't believe we have the permission to dream, imagine, invent, visualize, and play as fundamental actions necessary to achieve social change. The third is a pivot from problem fixing to possibility creating. I know it's really hard to dream when we are fighting for justice. The issues we care about are all urgent, life-threatening, and entrenched. The myth of problem fixing is that knowledge of the problem is all that we need to solve it. By dreaming and imagining, we can move beyond simply problem fixing and see the world we want to create, rather than the issues we need to eliminate. And in some ways, this can feel like dangerous thinking when we also so desperately need policy that aligns with our climate reality. But many organizers and strategists I admire continuously point to this importance of fostering a public imagination and of cultivating the muscle of radical imagination needed to dream beyond fear, to borrow Adrienne Maree Brown's words in Emergent Strategy. So if we understand the climate crisis as, at least in part, a crisis of the imagination, we need to take seriously the work of fostering public imagination for desirable futures. And this is a job for artists and culture makers. We invoke utopia not as a place to arrive at, but a point on a horizon that moves us towards it. As Steve Duncan and Steve Lambert write, utopia gives us a direction. It orients our compasses no matter where we are or what we are doing. It gives us a point to look to on a horizon, enabling us to see the different paths available and to reorient ourselves. And so at this point, we've written a kind of brochure of a welcome to the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters, including some of the kinds of program objectives. I'm not going to read through these today since we're a little bit shorter on time now, but that's available through Canadian Theatre Review, or I'm also happy to share it with you. Instead, what I want to do is also just kind of start to share a little bit about some of the courses that we've created. So in our first granting period, we had a Canada Council grant for the last year and a half, and we created 13 courses under that funding. And 9 or 10 of these, 10 as of this morning, I think, are publicly visible, and I'm hoping the last 4 will be released within the end of the month. They're all, as I said, like freely accessible and available for engagement through individualized study, community study, or incorporation into existing kinds of classes, library context, all these different kinds of things. So I wanted to start with sharing a little bit about Sunita's course on peasant futurisms, cultivating delicious futures. Sunita's award-winning Bosnian-Canadian playwright, poet, writer, and scholar. She escaped the genocide of her Muslim Bosniak people and was a refugee for 5 years across 3 countries before immigrating to Canada in 1997. And she's the granddaughter of Bosniak peasants on both sides of her family. So this course invites learning from peasant knowledges and practices of cooperative labor, mutual aid, subsistence farming, and self-sustainability to posit peasant futurisms as a joyful way of living locally and relationally that rejects forced ruptures from land and resists the compulsory digitization of life. Peasant futurisms is a call to transform capitalist cities into edible and wilder eco-cities with protected green belts and food belts rooted in circular economies with the goal of growing more livable and delicious, pleasant futures for all. What we essentially create with each course is a kind of orienting video, kind of like a master class, like welcome to this class. Here are the key touchstones and key concepts. In Sunita's, because she's also a scholar, there's also like a really accessible kind of like orientation to key kinds of frameworks and concepts like mutual aid, the extractive economy, regenerative economies, regenerative agriculture, like all these different kinds of things, really with the intention that these would be very accessible to a wide range of learners or people listening. And then in addition to that, there's an actual syllabi. And in her case, it's like a 50-some page kind of syllabus. And I'll pull it up maybe after just because the tech gets a little bit slower, where there's some kind of narrative description, a list of like readings, clips, like YouTube videos to watch, podcasts to listen to, pop culture kind of clips in which we can like learn from, and then very accessible and practical kinds of like activities of like, okay, now after watching this like video, call your like mom and try to understand this about your family's past and the ways in which there may be kind of peasant practices within those family past that you either continue to actually value or maybe that were lost somewhere along the way towards a kind of modernization and move towards urban context. Or here's how to like instructions on more sustainable kinds of like agricultural practices that you can do even in very small kind of apartment spaces. These kinds of things are like ways, suggestions of how to like build deeper relationships with your neighbors, right? So these kinds of things that actually start to bring forward those values with really kind of practical and hands-on and often fun and playful kinds of activities. So I'll perhaps be able to show you a little bit more after, but you got a sense of kind of part of the future that is trying to be created through some of these teachings. And then, so this gives you a kind of orientation, right? So it works through a lot of different kinds of frameworks. And this is just like basically the table of contents. And then there's a number of other kinds of classes. So another one that I wanted to foreground today is this course by Sandra Lamouche, who's a member of Big Stone Cree Nation and a champion hoop dancer, as well as an educational leader, multidisciplinary artist. And she really draws on the teachings of hoop dance and its ideas of unity, balance, equality, resilience, and interconnectedness to guide the course. And in it, the instructions are really around how to deepen your connection to land in like emotional, mental, spiritual, physical ways, and then how that helps you then move towards land protection, essentially, right? So there's often a real kind of like everyday activist kind of component to these classes as well. And so then there's many other courses that we've created. UCAD Projects is a collective who creates culture for what's coming. So their courses around telling the story of the end of the world, challenging the authority of pre-existing ideologies, and invites participants to engage with new narratives as we prepare for the significant challenges we face today, including those brought forward by AI, economic inequality, climate change, and rising authoritarianism. Other courses draw a little bit more on like critical utopian kind of thinking and practice. So this course around design by Megan Byrne, Unsustainable Utopias by Mo Badix, that draws on a lot of their experiences in kind of like utopian-esque projects that failed. And so she's trying to offer those lived lessons so that we don't repeat those. A lot of them are also really tied to systems of power, the tendency for utopian projects to move towards cults, things like that, and how to like prevent that in your own utopian aspirations. And then again, a lot really draw on lived experiences, Crip Glam by Julia Havard, Choreodaemonics by Laura Lawson and Sydney Skybetter, Migrant Workers' Futures by Ali Reza Dorcha, Immigration and Mobility by Taiwo Afolabi. And then a couple of the courses really heavily lean on artistic practices as a way to move towards creating these kinds of futures. So the Slow Playwriting Project by Marilo Nunez draws on the Chilean feminist tradition of creating arpilleras as a strategy of communicating what was happening during the dictatorship in Chile, and women would sew these scenes of what was happening in their communities and then roll them up and send them out so that those news could be circulated. So she's using this now as a kind of story creating strategy that's also done in community as a way to deepen story and co-create them. Christina Wong also guides you through attempting to make dramatic social change in the world without giving into existing systems of charity, failing, and then making a solo performance piece about how you tried. So again, really using humor also within our kind of creative approaches and coping strategies. So there's a couple more courses, but I think I'll pause there just so that I have a chance to engage with everybody, but thanks so much, and I'm happy to talk more about this project at any time.